Today's video is going to be about simple strategies for increasing functional pain-free strength. I've got two different methods plus a couple of bonuses. So let's get into it. First one is called dense strength, or more commonly known as EMOM training. So you're going to pick a push, pull and leg movement that you're going to perform, and you're going to start a new set of each of those exercises on the minute, every minute basically. So that might look like a push-up, a pull-up and a bodyweight squat. You can do this for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour if you really want. But if we're going to be training every day, which I like to do, then you're probably not going to do an hour of that every day for each exercise. So the minimum I would say to do is 5 minutes. 10 is the standard, what we call a regular dense block. 5 is half, and then 20 is double. That's basically what dense is. Why would you do it? Unless you're doing an hour, then it's going to save a lot of time. You can do 3 different exercises in 15 minutes, and that can be your training for the day. It's sub-maximal by design and self-regulating, so you don't have to push yourself too hard, meaning you can recover in time to perform it again the next day. So you're only working between 40 and 60% of the maximum amount of reps you'd be able to do in a set of a particular exercise. The more sets you do, the lower intensity your block is going to be. So for a 10D block, which is 10 minutes of every minute on the minute training, ballpark figure is about 40% of your rep max. For 5 minutes, it's about 60%. They're just rough numbers, but always start on the lower end and then work your way up from there. At the end of a dense block, you should feel like you could do the whole thing again. So to help with the fatigue and recovery even more, you're going to cycle through different exercises on a daily basis, or however often you're training. The second method I like to train with is just a regular hard sets method. So what this looks like is, again, it starts with a push-pull legs as the foundation, but you shoot for a weekly volume target, and then you break that down further into a daily set and rep target. Using pretty much the same exercises, and you choose these based on your training goals, obviously. If you've got injuries you need to work through, then that's also a consideration to take into account. But again, you're cycling through these exercises and you're shooting for 2 to 4 of these hard sets per muscle group per day. And then over the course of a week, that's going to add up to 10 to 20 sets. If you're new to this style of training, then you're going to be more towards the lower end. You could even shoot more than 20 if you're in a decent calorie surplus and you recover well. But just make sure you're tracking your training and seeing if you actually are recovering enough to improve over time, as opposed to just recovering enough to keep doing what you're doing. So what do I mean by a hard set? This is anything within 3 reps of failure. How you define failure is really up to you. You can use technical failure or complete muscular failure. As long as your form isn't too sloppy, then keep going more towards muscular failure. But again, if we're going to be doing this every day, although we're only training 3 different movements, it can be quite hard to recover. Depending on your diet, you can be quite sore from these movements, so you don't have to go all out. This is more of a high frequency approach to training. So it's more about the long-term volume that you accrue as opposed to going all out every day. So what might this look like? For example, today I used the rings to do some ring push-ups, just regular feet on the ground, didn't elevate them, for 3 sets. Then I flipped around and did some ring rows for 3 sets. And then I finished with some ATG split squats. If you feel like you have some lagging muscles, or as I mentioned previously, you have an injury or some other area you'd like to work on more, then you can add in 2 to 3 sets of an accessory / isolation movement. It depends on how many days you're going to be training to get to your weekly volume, but you're going to cycle through these accessory movements as well. So for example, at the end of your push-pull legs, if you want to work more on biceps, you could do 2 to 3 sets of an incline dumbbell curl. The next day, your exercise might be French press for triceps. The third day, you might do some dumbbell flies for shoulders. Ideally, you'd stick to only a couple of these exercises and just work on them throughout the week and then improve the next week. But I think as long as you're pushing towards that failure at least once per week per exercise, that's going to be enough to elicit a stimulus, at least in the beginning. But just play around with it and see how you go. You don't want to spread yourself too thin. Just choose a couple of key areas that you want to focus on improving that the compound movements might not hit, and just work on those. So when you're doing this hard sets method, it's important to make sure your muscles are close to fully recovered in between sets. Otherwise, you're not going to get the growth stimulus that we're after with this method, as it's lower volume. So the amount of rest you need is going to depend on you. So you're going to have to figure that out. But generally, it's a minimum of 3 minutes. That's what I would use if I'm going to be doing all of the sets in one go. If you're doing it throughout the day, then it doesn't matter. But as long as you're getting within that 3 reps of failure, then you're good to go. So the bonus training approach that I'll add is grease the groove. You may or may not have heard of it before, but it's pretty much as it sounds. It is also a higher volume and higher frequency method of training, but completely submaximal, usually 50 to 70% of the total amount of reps you could do in a set, and you're just going to be accruing sets throughout the day and week. This way of training is more to elicit a neurological response as opposed to a hypertrophy response for muscle size. But again, you're still going to get a growth response, just not as much. If you don't have the time in a day to block out 30, 40, 60 minutes of training, then this is a great method. This also works great if you work in a more sedentary job, like in an office. You can get up periodically, smash out a submaximal set, get some blood flow going, and then get back to work. This approach can also be used to increase your max numbers for pull-ups, push-ups, squats, whatever it is. As long as you keep at it for 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks is a regular grease the groove cycle. And you generally only want to focus on one exercise at a time, which can get quite boring. So this isn't for everyone. If you were just doing pull-ups and only pull-ups for 6 to 8 weeks, but it's a tried and tested method, and you'll find that by the end of a cycle, your maximum should have gone up. So all 3 of these methods I think are super accessible to anyone, whether you're a complete beginner, intermediate, or calisthenics pro. You don't need any equipment for these, although it certainly does help, especially with the accessory and isolation movements. All can be adapted to use absolutely no time at all, and are super efficient for achieving the body composition, strength and size goals that you want. So if you're after diet or training advice on how to get a lean, functional and pain-free physique, then apply for coaching in the link in the description, and I look forward to seeing you in next week's video. Peace.